Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe.
Welcome to the Maderi Music Podcast, where we explore the intersections of creative arts, healing, psychology, politics, and social justice. As always, we are your hosts, Dorian Wallace.
And it's your girl, DeMarie Cecily.
Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe. Sometimes I speak and I feel like it ain't my words, like I'm just a vessel channeling inside this universe.
All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? So just an update. DeMarie is still on her very cool legacy tour with Hala down in Mexico. So she is unfortunately not able to join us for this conversation. However, from what I have learned, it sounds like they're having a really transformative time down there. A lot of the youth, the young people are really learning just a lot about their history and their culture, and it's a really beautiful thing. Today we have a very cool guest. This is Leila Barghouty. And Leila is a journalist, and I heard about you from very cool sort of conspiracy theory investigative journalist podcast called QAnon Anonymous, which, just in case anybody's familiar with it, they are not pro QAnon. They are debunking QAnon. Anyways, Leila, you do a lot, or have done a lot, of work down in Guantanamo Bay, which is the infamous prison where there is really well-documented torture campaigns. And as you know, we're a music-oriented podcast. I've always been super interested in the psychological uses of music, and we always cover the positive sides of it here on this podcast and its healing modalities, but we rarely speak about the toxic or the more dangerous uses of music. And so Leila, I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that. But before we get into the dialogue, is there anything you want to introduce about yourself that I did not cover?
Yeah, sure. It's so nice to meet you, and I'm excited to listen to the rest of your podcast as well. Like you said, my name is Leila Barghouty. I'm a journalist primarily covering policing and military and sort of conflict around the world, especially as it relates to civilian populations and how those forces treat civilians. So I have done a lot of work around Guantanamo Bay. I'm certainly not the most prolific or talented journalist who covers the prison and the court there. I would direct everybody, if they haven't yet, to read work by Carol Rosenberg and John Ryan, two of my colleagues who have been covering, Carol has been covering Guantanamo Bay for like 20 plus years, and John Ryan has been doing so for, I think, close to 10 at this point. And both of them just have like an iconic dedication to making sure that the story doesn't get forgotten, because anybody who's familiar with my work will sort of see that I haven't been in probably a year or two at this point, maybe even longer, because of COVID. And the primary reason for that is because it's very difficult to get editors and networks interested in this story, particularly if there's not a viral moment that people are thinking of. So Carol and John do amazing work in making sure that the story doesn't get forgotten, that it doesn't get ignored as much as possible. And I just always want to plug their work when I can. On my end, I've certainly spent my career covering like a little bit more of the offbeat aspects of each of these things and each of these like institutions, whatever the story may be. So for Guantanamo, I did some work on the culture there, both with the people who work there, but also with the people who live there, because there are a lot of families, military families who, one parent or a spouse is the person who works on the base, and then the rest sort of just have to follow and live the lifestyle there. And then also the history and things like that, and just how Guantanamo Bay is, part of, it's part of Cuba, and it's part of this region that is very much not represented in, the American military, but also just like the idea of a military base as it is. So all of that is to say, it's a very interesting and rich story that is not over, even though some of the stuff I think we're going to talk about is hopefully in the past. At least we don't have evidence that it's still going on in the way that it was during the CIA's rendition, detention, and interrogation program. But yeah, it's a really fascinating and rich world that and a story that doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon.
Yeah. So I guess to start off, for our listeners who may not be familiar, what is Guantanamo Bay Detention Center? Sure.
So the detention center on Guantanamo Bay is exactly that. It's a sort of war prison that was created by the Bush administration to sort of house and detain, of course, people that were specifically captured and renditioned to the United States for suspicion of acts of terrorism, and most of those, if not all, directly related to 9/11. That said, as most people probably know, it's gone from having hundreds of detainees to now having under 40. The vast majority of those, if not all, never charged. I guess actually there's like let me rephrase that. The vast majority of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay were never charged and have since been released or transferred to other institutions around the world. And those that remain are, many of them have also not been charged and have even been, categorized as not having any involvement in, terrorist activity against the United States, but their transfer or their release is just so slow and so difficult to facilitate. So they spend a lot of time in this arbitrary detention. And then on the other side of that, you have the high value detainees that are charged with specific charges related to terrorism against the United States. That's events like the USS Cole bombing and obviously 9/11. So things like that they haven't been found guilty of necessarily, but that they're associated with having some sort of involvement. And that involvement can be from anything from like actual planning, allegedly, to more like distant, what is the word? To more like material support, financial support, things like that. So it's like it's a very interesting place. It's very different from a regular prison in a lot of ways. It's not like Bureau of Federal Prisons, like normal like prison like we would find here. In a lot of ways, it looks like one. The facility now is like designed with those standards in mind, but you can still see on Guantanamo Bay Camp X-Ray, which is where a lot of the detainees were first taken, where a lot of that torture actually occurred. And that's more of the stereotypical like chain link fence, wooden watchtower, not a lot of like real permanent structures. It doesn't look like a sort of normal contemporary prison. It looks very archaic in some ways, and now it's like very overgrown. And it's really, when you think about the fact that Guantanamo and that part of Cuba can get temperatures like into the like 100s, especially in the summer, the fact that a lot of these detainees were kept in what is essentially cages outside is really fascinating to think about, and certainly not up to the standards of what, again, a normal prison would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you were speaking, It really does. With all the differences that you just described, there really are a lot of chilling similarities with the prison industrial complex that's taking place across the United States. At Rikers Island, for instance, there are a lot of individuals who have not been charged, and they're supposed to be there for under a year at maximum, and they're getting into their fourth or fifth or sixth year. There's even a few detainees who are nearing a decade. And obviously the system is slow, and it takes a long time to process people, and the pandemic, of course, added to this. But the psychological cost on the individuals and the families and communities of these individuals is just one of the areas that I find the most troubling, with how it goes. But yeah, that being said, let's get into the more specifics, which is about the music. And now this may seem funny to you, because in our email exchange, I think you actually worded it with, "You're probably familiar with the CIA playlist on Spotify." I was not familiar with
my
those.
Goodness.
And so I really wish DeMarisa was here to confirm some of this, but I'm very psychotic when it comes to information. So it's like I listen to every one of the playlists that I found, as well as read a couple of just like, the top 20 songs the CIA used to torture detainees at Guantanamo Bay articles and those sorts of things. But it's really, really interesting because, man, I'm totally coming at this as a non-objective person. I've got my own biases, but
I will remain as objective as I can. You're
Great.
welcome to have many biases.
Great. So yeah, it just, reading these lists and listening to this music, it really indicated the type of person who was deciding what music to play. Because, well, first off, the number one band, like the band that seems to be on every list, is Dope, which is a New York City-based nu metal band from the late 90s, early 2000s. Known for kind of raw, very simplistic oriented riffing and simplistic oriented lyrics, which I'm not, when I say simplistic, I don't want anybody to think that I'm implying that's a bad thing. It's just, it's the way they describe their music, and it's the way that I would describe it. It's very, very minimalistic in regards to the way it's structured. But the thing that I find really, really funny about the list is it seems to be music that the people who created it either listen to and assume the other people will just hate, or music that they find annoying themselves. And it doesn't really take into the subjective experience that music is. And I'll just point like one little thing out there. There was an individual at Rikers that we were working with who, on the surface, very oriented around like gangster rap, or well, really more the current drill music thing that's happening in Brooklyn. But as we got to getting to know this individual, we found out that his favorite band was Queen. Like the famous rock band from Bohemian Rhapsody and all of that. And it was just one of those, on an individual experience, it was an eye-opener, because it was like, if I judged him from how he introduced himself and how he presented himself, would have never expected that not only did he enjoy the music of Queen, but he was a Queen encyclopedia. Like we listened to some of the music and he'd be like, "Yo, 1972, Brian May laid down 7 tracks on the," and he knew his shit when it came to Queen. And so all of that kind of, I don't want to use the word care and thought, because this is about torture, but none of that detail seemed to go into the music that was chosen. It seemed to be very subjective from the creator of the list. So I'm curious, just if you have any insights into what I just said, as well as just your experience of what you do know about the music programs through torture.
Sure. So first I'll say I recently spoke to some Gen Z kids who I learned from that Queen is like not considered a cool band anymore. Like it's like old people music, which tore my soul into a million pieces. But yes, beyond that, the music. So for listeners who don't know, on Spotify, on YouTube, you can easily find these playlists that are sort of the suspected, with a few songs are absolutely confirmed. A lot of them are sort of speculation, but pretty strong speculation of songs that the CIA and other forces involved with the detention and interrogation of these folks in Guantanamo Bay used when they were trying to really psychologically break them. So, torture has many, many elements and methods of torture. There's no one way of doing it. There's no understood way. And the CIA's torture program was particularly interesting because the methods they used were from this handbook called SEER training, which is something that a lot of U.S. military personnel go through. And that was sort of the justification of, well, if our boys, so to speak, go through this, then it can't be that bad. That was sort of like the disclaimer that they tried to go in when they created this program to use. So there's the physical aspect of it, which are things, you might have heard of, like waterboarding or like stress positions or even sleep deprivation, which maybe sort of crosses the threshold between physical and psychological. And then there's like these psychological methods, which is where music would come in. So, a big question that interrogators sort of had in the backs of their minds, if I can editorialize a little bit, but that has come up a lot in the court in Guantanamo Bay, is this question of, were we actually hurting them? Well, the thing is, when you waterboard somebody, you're not drowning them, you're simulating drowning. And when you play loud music so that somebody can't sleep, or so that they, start to get stressed, or so that the repetition starts to drive them crazy, you're not physically hurting them, right? Like you're not creating a wound or a bruise that people can go back and point to. You're sort of, doing something that's a little bit more, it has these long-term effects, even if it doesn't show those wounds in real time. And I think that's where music and other forms of like sound, or let's say like not traditionally physical torture, that's where they sort of like fall into place. And like you said, the style of music. So if you do go out and find this playlist, you'll see like the style of music it's a lot of metal. It's a lot of like rock and roll. There are a few like patriotic songs on there. It's very like reflective of the type of person that would have been in the military in the early 2000s. So like a young white male, that's absolutely like true. That's just the genre of music, and that's who listens to that type of music. And then on another level, you have like, the messages of a lot of these songs. I think one of them was that song. I think it's Drowning Pool, the Bodies Hit the Floor song that people always quote. And also that was like, very, very popular at the time. And even, I think still goes viral. Like it's part of so many memes. It's such a ubiquitous song. And that's something that you can actually find like articles and stories from service members who are like, we listened to that song while we were serving because, it riled us up. And that was the feeling. I think people forget that, especially young people who haven't been around and weren't born when 9/11 happened, the general like disposition of a lot of, US opinion was that, suddenly there was this very, very clear enemy that the government had sort of like portrayed as causing 9/11. And suddenly, it was a war that hit home for a lot of people because they either knew somebody that had died in 9/11 or who was affected, or they saw it on TV. And it was very much not like this distant sort of fighting and combat that, now, and even in a lot of wars before, was sort of like the mood. It affected everybody. And that being said, you have a lot of service members who joined right after 9/11 because they were so viscerally affected by it. And you see that reflected in, and I'm sure you can speak to this too, but like just how people's attitude was and why they joined and things like that. And that is why these songs, that it can seem like they're very, the idea of like riling yourself up to go into combat can sound very, I don't know, scary is not the word, but like a little bit, it's difficult to think about. It's difficult on all fronts. And that's one of the things you see in the songs that that sort of like make their way onto this playlist. That's the vibe. It's not like these were scientifically chosen, like carefully calculated songs that had a certain, chord progression or had a certain range or a certain even like genre or anything like that. Because on the other side of it, in addition to this like heavy metal and like a few like very patriotic songs, you have like children's music that was very repetitive and that out of context. And you see that in horror, you see that in so many genres that are, created to unsettle people, or is that a word, to unsettle, but that are created to be unsettling. Like, the little girl in the hallway, a little girl is not scary, but a little girl staring at you down a hallway, like in The Shining, is very scary and unsettling. And that's where the children's music sort of comes in, because out of context, if you're a prisoner and you're, trapped in a box or something, and somebody starts blasting the Barney theme song over and over and over, like in a lot of ways, and, for certain types of people, like that would be a lot more disconcerting than hearing like, a metal song on repeat. So it's this very sort of, ad hoc attempt to break people, to, tire them out mentally, to disturb them. Because also you have to remember, you'll have noticed in the playlist and in all of any materials related to music in terms of like torture, is that it's all Western music. It's all Western children's song. It's not, it's something that's very unfamiliar to somebody who didn't grow up listening to that type of music or hearing those children's songs. Not to say they weren't familiar with them, like it's not like they were living, on another planet, but there's something that like feeling of familiarity makes, or lack of familiarity can make something like a song hit a lot differently. If you're not used to it, like Baby Shark for some people, since that wasn't around when we were kids, is like horribly grating. But for parents who have to listen to it now, it's like, just another thing that they can tune out. So all of that goes into like the sort of, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak to like the science behind it, but all of that goes into what we know about how uncomfortable and unsettling like these moments were. And they absolutely did cause lasting damage to anybody who had to endure them.
Yeah. It's really interesting because, you had mentioned that it's all Western music, which was something that I found particularly funny. I hate using the word, but just funny in how the music was chosen, because it's very much a projection of must be what these people don't listen to or don't like. And I know this is an anecdotal piece of evidence, but have you ever seen the documentary Heavy Metal in Baghdad?
No, should I? That sounds amazing.
It is. It's about a metal band in Baghdad.
Wow, that sounds like the greatest story.
Yeah, it is a great story. And they listen to Slayer and Slipknot and Metallica and like all these bands, and there's something very hilariously ignorant that it's like we live in the age of the internet. People know music, especially younger folks, which I don't necessarily know the ages of all the detainees, but I'm assuming at least in the early 2000s, there were 20s, 30s, 40s. Yeah. So, these are people that are pretty aware of the internet and things like that. I'll give just a couple of anecdotal pieces. But, one that I learned is a friend of mine was in Africa, in Nigeria, and he made a reference to his cell phone not getting signal. And he went, I know, first world problem. And the gentleman he was working with was just like, we all have cell phones. Like the first world problem is we don't have clean water. Like our water is undrinkable, but like we all have cell phones and computers and we do go on the internet. We're aware of things. And so that's just one piece, like anecdotal piece. But another part is that sometimes this is music that we assume might be offensive because we've experienced people being offended by it in our culture. So a really, really prime example is I have an older brother who's almost a decade older, and he's like still very convinced in his mind that Guns N' Roses is like just a wildly offensive band. And it's like, dude, that shit is like played in commercials now. Like Axl Rose has been on Sesame Street. Like so that's it's just always a funny thing when we sort of project these things onto others on what is and is not offensive. And I'll give just one last anecdotal piece, but oftentimes we look at music we're either unfamiliar with or have seen the projections to, and we end up creating this sort of bias on what might or might not be offensive. And I was once working with an individual in Rikers who was complaining about the current hip hop music coming out right now, like all the 18, 19-year-olds that are doing drill music. And drill music, for those that are not familiar, drilling someone means you're shooting someone. So drill music translates as shooting music. And it's a lot about gang violence. It's a lot about what goes on in the streets, all this sort of shit. But I was in a group with a gentleman who's my age, a little bit older, and we're listening to Biggie Smalls' Give Me the Loot, which is about an armed robbery. There's literally a line where he kicks a pregnant woman in the stomach. Like that's how violent this song is. And as we're listening to it, this guy is like, man, the music today, it's just violence and disrespect. And I don't get it. And literally had to like take it back with him and be like, hey, what is the song we're listening about? Like, what is this song about? And, this happens in so many places. I've been in very rural places where a lot of folks listen to country music. A lot of white folks listen to country music, and they complain about the violence in the music of hip hop without looking at any of the lyrics of Johnny Cash, which are all about gangs and robberies and sexual assault and all of these sorts of things. I know I said that was the last anecdote, but I'm going to give one more anecdote, which is there's also just the political misunderstanding of music. One of my favorite examples is Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, or Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land. Because Born in the USA is literally an anti-war song about a veteran who comes back, working class man, and which race is never specified, but it's sort of implied he is probably a white dude because it's a Bruce Springsteen song, but it's never actually specified. And all the verses are critiquing the war in Vietnam over and over and over again, where it basically comes to the conclusion of this shit is such bullshit, but at the end of the day, like there's this absurd air of nationalism and patriotism, and everybody's just singing Born in the USA. And And, people like Donald Trump, people like Ronald Reagan, people like Pat Buchanan have used these songs as these patriotic cries when they don't seem to realize that the song is literally, the verse is critiquing them and the chorus is satire of what they're doing, and they're doing it. And it just gets into this very meta space. This Land Is Your Land is very similar. That's a communist, like, rah-rah song that was in retaliation to God Bless the USA by Irving Berlin. And now it's taught as a children's song, as like a patriotic children's song. And it's literally a communist song. So anyways, that was like a lot of rambling of anecdotes, but it cracks me up that the music that's chosen, it is very clearly coming from a subjective standpoint of the individuals that are choosing the music. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Like that's the thing about music, is that it's so subjective, and kind of like what you mentioned, like my family are Arab Muslims and they love Metallica. And even like the older, like my, aunts and uncles, like they listen to Metallica, and Metallica ended up on this list. And with the detainees, a lot of them were Western educated. A lot of them came from the West and, were part of immigrant families, but, it's not like they were, like I said, it's not like they lived on another planet. I think part of it is sort of repetition is like a known tactic in, all sorts of, what would you even call it? All sorts of methods of making people uncomfortable or making people leave, things like that. So playing any song, even if you like it, at a super high volume, when you're sleep deprived, when you're, hungry, when your body is hurting, over and over and over, even if it's your favorite song, it's eventually going to drive you crazy. And I think that's what these techniques and the RDI program's techniques writ large, that's what they aimed to do. They didn't aim to, violently, slash you open and make you like immediately confess because you had this gaping wound. And if you weren't, if you didn't confess fast enough, you were going to die. It wasn't like that. It was this slow burn of repetition and really like hurting people to their core in all these different ways, and finding the best ways to do that in order to get information that didn't end up even being useful or accurate, because of course it wouldn't be, because when you're pushed to that level of desperation, the quality of information that you're going to get in any situation is never going to be, reliable. And it's funny, like you mentioned, just the idea of like how like the musicians themselves, like their political leanings it's not like, I think that's an important thing to stress. You have all these bands on this list and musicians and singers and whatever it is, companies and jingles, things like that. It's none of them were asked. It's not like the CIA was like, hey, can we license this song to play over and over and over for somebody like that we've trapped and put in a tiny box? It's not like that. Many of them didn't know. Many of them obviously would not have said yes if they did know. And I think it's really fascinating, that sort of, it feels very dystopian, I think, for me at least, to sort of, if you think of yourself as a creative person who produces anything, the idea of something that you've made being used to hurt people, especially in this way that can last for so long. Several years ago, I spoke to Muazzam Beg, who was a Gitmo detainee who was tortured and is now an activist trying to end torture all over the world, but also close Guantanamo Bay. And he was one of the people who I don't remember exactly if he had experienced it himself, but he heard the songs being played when the CIA was using these methods. And he mentioned to me, like, just, how he'll be walking down the street and he'll hear one of those songs and he's instantly transported back, to his cell and to sort of that period of his life, which is very difficult. But that's music, right? Like, you hear a song that played at your high school prom, you remember high school prom all of a sudden, even if you never think about it, even if you didn't know, like, that memory lived in your brain. And if you think about things, in terms of like how painful that would be if it's a memory. And I think lots of us can think of sounds and smells that remind us of a darker time in our life. Just imagine that, 100-fold. Like, what if it's like a truly painful, several years that you're never going to get back? All of that it's really difficult to deal with, like you mentioned earlier. And it's one of those things that's just really sad about the whole process. And I don't think there's a ton of conversation about how in any like scenario where music is weaponized, the idea of, the artist has put something out that they hoped to make people feel something. Maybe it's not always positive feelings. Maybe people want, to stir emotion in other ways, but the idea that it would be turned into a weapon of war is just a really, huge and striking thing to think about. And there is one band who, I have the story pulled up right now. It was written, it was covered by the Washington Post and the Miami Herald when it happened. But one of the bands that is on this supposed list of songs that were used did a concert in Guantanamo Bay because, like artists go to military bases all over the world. It's very common to perform for service members. And that happened. And it just happened to be one of the bands that had a song supposedly featured on the torture list. And there's a really great story in the Washington Post by Alex Horton where he, sort of gives a little bit of insight on what that weird sort of convergence of all these different things. And I think that's another thing about Guantanamo Bay overall is that it's really bizarre to go to McDonald's and like get a Big Mac less than a mile down the street from where people are known to have been tortured and where these crimes took place that just really show the worst part of humanity. And it just is like, it's just a fact. Like you're there and you can get fries for $2 and then you can drive 5 minutes and you're like, oh yeah, some of the worst things and human history happened in this location. And it's bizarre. And that's really one of the overarching things about visiting Guantanamo Bay and like being immersed in the stories there is just the surreal and bizarre nature of its existence.
Yeah. Are you able to share which band went there, what the name is?
Yes, I can. I just had it pulled up. Let me find it. I'll send you the article too so that you can use it.
Yeah, this is I guess like to summarize kind of this part of the dialogue, it seems that it's not necessarily about the subjective nature of the pieces chosen. Like that you can tell the type of person that chose the music, but the actual use of torture is the volume and the relentlessness of the sound, as well as the situation in which the person is involved with like the circumstances. So the dehydration, starvation, sleep depriving, all of those factors. Would that be an accurate way to kind of summarize?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think at no point is there any, like, how can I say this? Like, the music itself can't be blamed for any of this, right? And Barney can't be blamed for how catchy and horribly annoying the Barney song is and things like that. It is absolutely like similar to how anything is weaponized throughout history. Things that are not inherently lethal or inherently dangerous can very easily be turned into something dangerous, behind the right hands. So absolutely, it's really, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's difficult to think about for a lot of reasons, but, primarily just like like a lot of these songs and these bands, if you're familiar with the torture program and that story, they're sort of like forever associated with it in a way that just really sucks for the artists. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. And it looks like in 2017, the band Drowning Pool, who the ones who made that song Bodies, that has the famous lyric, "Let the bodies hit the floor," which was not only very popular at the time and very popular among troops, but is also now like part of like a meme. Like you see that song put over like tons and tons of like TikToks and things like that. And they performed on Guantanamo Bay for a July 4th show. And yeah, it's just a really, again, a fascinating convergence of like, just like these very interesting sides of like the military industrial complex, like the music industry, how we consume music. And, you know, I think another thing to remember is like, we know so little about the torture program and about a lot of what our government does. And so much of this is like, you know, really good guesses or really good speculation. But I think that's important to just keep in mind and remember. And, you know, we don't have anybody we can ask, like, why did you pick this song? Or why did you play this on repeat? Or like, why Barney? Why this? Was that really what was used? Like we can't get those answers. And I think as a journalist, that's really frustrating. As anybody who works in these fields knows, like, part of what's really difficult is just constantly having to dig and dig and dig. And you really never know what is going through someone's mind when they're abusing power or when they're abusing a weapon, when they're abusing something that shouldn't be a weapon. And it's just, I think that's what's really difficult and striking for me is like, whenever I do any of these stories, you're only getting 1% of what really happened. If that, if you're lucky, if you're able to talk to people who are really there, if you're able to like find proof of something, like, you know, think about any time you've gotten a parking ticket or a traffic ticket, like the only information that exists on paper that, you know, anybody would be able to find 20 years later is just what's on the parking ticket. But the reason you parked there, or the reason you were speeding, or, you know, what was going through your head while that happened, that gets completely lost to history. So that applies on a grander scale with pretty much everything we do when we investigate government agencies. And I think it's just important to keep in mind and just think about, like, it's so complicated and so difficult.
No, that's a really beautiful way you described it, because I literally just thought of, you know, there's a fire hydrant that sometimes we park too close to here, and it's like the reasons are it was 3 a.m. There were no other parking spots. We knew we had to take our daughter to school at 8, you know, so it's like the cops aren't really out at that point, and it's like it's a risk that you take. And it's like, yeah, there's still like 3 or 4 feet, but you're supposed to be, you know, 7 feet. And we have gotten tickets. It's been rare, but we have gotten them. And on the paper, it says how close we parked to the fire hydrant. And that's it. But it like doesn't take into account any of the like, yeah, I was at work literally all day and it's now 3 a.m. and I have to be up in 5 hours, and this is the best I can do, and I'm still leaving space at the fire. Like, it's just all those things are going through. So yeah, that was a really beautiful point. So a couple of quick things, because I know I don't want to take up all your time today, but there's a couple of okay, so here's a conspiracy theory that I don't really have any data to back, but it's an anecdote from a friend of mine. So my involvement with the U.S. Army was through the music program. We were 42 Romeo, which is Army musician. And I went in the earlier 2000s, where a friend of mine was going during the Trump years in 2016. And he called me just to talk while he was at the school, because he didn't know how to process. They had a class on Rage Against the Machine. And he was like, this is so fucking weird, man, because overseas, whenever an army band goes over, Rage Against the Machine is one of the number one requested bands to be covered. And yet the army music program has banned the use of Rage Against the Machine stateside because the lyrics are considered anti-American. And there's something so haunting to me about this concept that when the music inspires energy that can be put forth to kill, it is acceptable. But when you're in a quote unquote safer space and can digest the lyrical content, it's banned. And that is just a really fascinating concept. And I don't know how accurate it is, other than that somebody that I know and trust called me after he had taken the class and was like, what the fuck? Like, I don't even know how to process this. But yeah, another factor is just the use of children's music, because a lot of us do find that stuff so annoying. And it is funny because we have a toddler right now, and she's 2 years old, and there's a lot of music that she just absolutely loves. Like Baby Shark is one of them. And there's sort of two modes of adapting to the music. The first is I almost treat it like a Zen processing. It's like, yeah, like this is just repetitive music. It's at a high-pitched voice. My daughter has a high-pitched voice, which I find beautiful. So, I'm going to enjoy just the repetition of this and treat it just as a drone or anything like that. The other sort of adaptive mechanism that's used internally is we listen to a lot of like Baby Shark playlists. So it's the same song, but like 50 different artists. And that subtle variety of different people and different styles can literally be like a game saver, because it's like whether or not we want to, our daughter is going to listen to Baby Shark, and that there's nothing we can do about that fact. So how can, as the parent, how can you be supportive and adapt through this music? So anyways, those are just two interesting kind of thoughts. But then I do this thing a lot where I like talk and then I name like 15 points and then try to like bring it back to wherever the fuck I was talking about. But I just I'm really curious about communicating with people who went through these programs with the music, because there's a couple of things that music therapy I think would be really beneficial for these individuals. So we actually do a lot of work with people who are leaving far-right extremist groups. So people involved in neo-Nazi groups, or like black shirt fascist, or Proud Boys, just any sort of far-right space that people get into the activist space. And music is oftentimes an indoctrination method. Go back to the 80s, the Nazi punk movement was huge. Screwdriver was a gigantic band that was used as indoctrination. And it wasn't necessarily the recordings, it was the experience of going to the concert. And Nazis became enough of a problem that, like NoFX has the band Nazi Punks Fuck Off, which is basically encouraging the audience to fight them so they'll leave. It was enough of a problem that happened. But even in our current age of fascism, there's an entire internet electronica music called Fashwave, which it's dance beat music, but like sort of that lo-fi shit that you listen to on your own when you're in your computer, because that's the way that people are indoctrinating fascists. And it utilizes cringe humor, and it utilizes like samples of like Adolf Hitler and those sorts of things, those sorts of people. And And anyways, when working with a fascist who is trying to get out of the movement, a common occurrence is the amount of guilt or shame that happens when a song gets stuck in their head. I'll use a specific individual who they were experiencing. They have come full circle out of the ideological space. Like they have come to realize that their bigotry is what was completely misinformed trauma, and they've even become friends with people of various groups that they used to hate, and they work in spaces to get people out of these movements. And yet a song will get stuck in their head that is from their fascist period. And this individual is telling me that they have moments of shame and just like, I feel horrible that I have nostalgia with this song. And so in music therapy practice, we sometimes take the song as it is, which I will tell you, there's nothing more, like, I've listened to the most violent hip hop music on the planet, and nothing is more shock invoking than neo-Nazi music. Like that shit is way more challenging to listen to on the therapeutic side of things. But you have to meet the client where they're at, and you have to work with them with where they're coming from. And so it's about recontextualizing the music. And it's like, okay, let's explore the fond memories, and let's explore why you're experiencing this shame. And is it the music that you're attracted to, or is it the somatic energy that this song is sort of riveting within your own personal being? And so that was a way long ass rant to get to. I'm wondering, and I imagine that there are ways to recontextualize this music, because the body keeps the score. The body remembers these musical memories. And if there would be a way to help individuals recontextualize and reclaim the ownership of this outside force infiltrating their psyche, I think that would be really, really beneficial. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that incredibly long ramble that I just pointlessly spewed.
No, absolutely. I think so. Certainly, there are many, many organizations that work to rehabilitate people that have endured torture, and that's both international politically motivated torture. And then also, torture happens domestically. It happens like within, smaller communities for other sadistic reasons that have nothing to do with trying to get a forced confession or something like that. So this is still an issue that affects like any issue of violence. Like there is the grand international scale of it, and then there is still like these smaller one-off things that happen, and it's exactly like you said, the body keeps score and people react to things differently. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, sort of like the idea of a song, not necessarily being taken the same way for everybody. Like it's really easy for somebody who hates hip hop to say hip hop is really violent, and then not see how the genres that they listen to also have violent undertones. Like it's very easy for all of us to have these blind spots and biases. And I think one of the things from covering torture that you sort of see again and again, or even from covering like a lot of violence and abuse at all stages, is people responding and saying, that's not so bad. I could totally go through that and it wouldn't mess me up for life. Or like, I could be waterboarded and that's not a big deal. I don't know what the problem is. Like it doesn't leave any physical scars. How could it be so bad? And there are many cases of people saying that and then experiencing it, or like agreeing to endure something like for the shock value or for content purposes or whatever it is online. You can Google it, and like people do it. And then during and after, they're like, actually, no, it was really, really bad. And that's a situation where, you're simulating something that you have a way of getting out of it, and you are not completely agency free, and not, wondering if this is going to be the day that you might die. And I think with anything, with any story and any issue related to whether it's incarceration or vulnerability or any situation where the person is vulnerable and does not have the option to get out of whatever the situation is, there is no way to simulate what that feels like. There's no way to guess or put yourself in their shoes if you have not also gone through it. And then even if you have, every experience is so different, and everybody's reaction to things is so different. And I think anybody who has experienced PTSD or experienced trauma knows how unpredictable it is, and how you can think you're fine for decades and years, or you can think, oh, this thing that happened to me is not so bad, I guess. And then like suddenly, you're having flashbacks like several years later. Suddenly, you're like petrified of doing something that you've done every day. And it's so complicated and so nuanced. And I think music is just such a good example of that, because it has so much power to do good in ways that we understand and that we don't understand. And it has that magic to it that is so rare with so much of our lives. But then it also can, be used to do a lot of harm, and a lot of lasting harm. And it's just it's a really rich and complicated thing to think about. And I think it's just a difficult subject to cover, and it's always difficult to talk to people who have gone through it, but their stories are so important. And I'm sure, I'm obviously not a psychologist or like a music expert like yourself, so I don't know how much of that can be undone or how much therapy can help, but I am a huge proponent of therapy of all kinds. So I definitely think that there is so much good work that's being done. There's so much more that could be done. And it's extremely important and difficult to grapple with. And then in terms of how the government and how all of these different parts of the government treat certain things domestically and abroad, like, Rage Against the Machine or any other band, that is like the story of American history, right? Like everything is different here than it is when you are an American abroad. Like, I think that applies to so many things. And I think it's a really fascinating, but not surprising thing that would be one of the exceptions to the rule. A lot like that can be applied to so many things. And obviously we don't have time to go through all of them, but I think, it's a really good anecdote and such a good thing for people to keep in mind. Because again, like I think the biggest takeaway from stories like this and topics like this is that it's so much more complicated than you think. And it's so much more, honestly, disappointing and insidious than you might think. I think that's something that I'm frequently surprised by. I always think, well, nothing can surprise me anymore. Like nothing can shock me. Nothing can, really affect me because, these issues are already so horrific and traumatic that you're like, it can't get any worse than this. And then it just does. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. And I think that is just human nature. And I would suggest anybody who's interested in it to try to read up on the power of music and how it's been abused and how sound has been abused by all of these different entities as well. And just try to always remember that it is so much more humble yourself and remember it's so much more complicated than we always think it is. And yeah, that was also a really long rambly answer to your really long ramble. So.
Yeah. And so if anybody is listening to this, who's a fan of Leila's work and found this podcast, 3 books that I really recommend for addressing somatic healing through trauma. The first is The Body Keeps the Score, which is a really great book by Bessel van der Kolk. But then the other 2 books is My Grandmother's Hands, which is about transgenerational trauma, and it gives really practical, tangible ways to start addressing your trauma, and that's by Resme Menakem. And then the third is The Politics of Trauma, by a really, really good author named Stacey Haynes. And these are three books that are about somatic approaches to addressing trauma, because talk therapy has its benefits, but it does not take into account the emotional memory that our bodies are addressing and reacting to. And music therapy, there are many, many different kinds of music therapy, but the kind that myself and DeMarisa practice is very somatically oriented and politically oriented, just in being aware that there are traumas that we may not even realize we're experiencing, yet our body is completely aware when it's happening. On a personal note, one of the first things that led me to going and seeking out psychiatric help for what turned into a PTSD diagnosis was I was with some Army friends and we were at the beach and everybody went in the water and I just refused to go in, and it made no sense. And I cognitively was like, this makes zero sense. Why am I like not going in the water? And it was with people I trusted. I was at a beach I'd been to many times, and it made no sense. And it was like, okay, there's something going on here that I don't understand, and I need to understand it. This wasn't the first panic attack. This was not the first time that it happened. It was just one that was so obvious that like I was so cognitively aware that it didn't make sense to the situation, and yet I was having this like fear response for something. And so a lot of people do understand these sort of paralyzing fear moments, or these bizarre reactions to things that you process after the fact. And so somatic work is really effective, and music therapy is really effective because you're addressing things that are being experienced in the right hemisphere versus the left hemisphere of the brain. And so with all of that, I wanted to cover, I don't want to because it's too late now, but just two songs to listen to if y'all want to check them out is Die Motherfucker Die by Dope and Fuck Your God by Deicide, because those are two of the songs that are on the list, and they both are very hilarious to me because those are very antagonistic messages. And apparently those are two songs that I saw on every list, and they're actually good songs. Like I like them. They're but anyways, Leila, where can people find you if they want to check out your work, which is fantastic work, by the way, if you didn't pick up on this.
You can find me obviously on Twitter. I'm taking a social media fast, so I'm very slow to see things on social media, but I still have it. It's PL Barghouty, my last name, Barghouty. And then my website is the same thing.com. And that's where I usually try to post new work that I'm doing. But yeah, I very much have taken over the past couple of years, a much more slow approach to life. So like, I'm not posting as much, I'm not doing as much like in, those spaces, but you can still find me there. And yeah, I will say, like, I'll just add to your note on the playlist is that, like, I just want to stress, it's not bad music. It's not, none of these artists, I think, ever imagined that would happen with their work. And yeah, it's a really powerful thing and a really important thing to think about. So yes, give all of those things a listen, but keep that in mind as you're doing it.
And the last question before we close, did you listen to any music today?
Oh my God, yes. I listen to music all of the time.
Yeah.
So the album by De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that album is like impossible to stream anywhere because of like it samples so much. So whenever I'm home and not driving or walking, I always have that album on repeat, because like the only place that I have the vinyl, but the only place that I can find it like to play like out of my computer is like through like YouTube and like other like, links that always get taken down and things like that. So I listen to that album, and my favorite song on that album is I Know.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Maderi Music. You can subscribe to patreon.com/Maderi Music for $5 per month, get a complete second episode every other week, and access our entire archive of premium episodes.
We love doing this, but it requires a substantial amount of time and energy, so our goal is to earn enough to cover 2 incomes.
Thank you so much if you're already a subscriber. Your subscription allows us to remain ad-free and editorially independent.
If you can't contribute financially, please consider posting about us on social media and sharing with your friends and community. You can find everything else on our website, www.maderimusic.com.
In the words of our comrade, Assata Shakur, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. We'll see you next time.
$5. Man, that ain't shit.
I don't know if it was worth $5, but it was pretty fucking good.